Okay, can everybody hear me? All right, I think we should be good to go. As I said, we've had a couple more people join. We are recording this for future use to share with people and things like that. And also we are live on Facebook so that folks who might not be familiar with Zoom can join us there. My name is Sam Spearing. I'm the Housing and Mobility Coordinator with Bloomfield Development Corporation. Also on the call from BDC is Christina Howell, our Executive Director. You can see her waving. Just to give a little bit of background, Bloomfield Development Corporation is the registered community organization for the neighborhood. We work in several program areas. We do small business support along our Liberty Avenue business district, as well as, Main Street, and a little bit of work on Penn Avenue with our friends at Bloomfield Garfield Corporation. We also do the Bloomfield Saturday Market. That's probably our most visible program, and that runs through November 20th, I believe is the last summer season, and then we're off for a bit, and then we have our winter market as well that runs the first and third Saturday of the month. We also work in mobility and infrastructure, mostly working with the city to advocate around a lot of our capital budget allocations, things like street repair, and some of the more interesting projects that the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure wants to work on in the neighborhood. And we also work in housing. That's kind of the impetus for tonight's meeting. So if you don't know already, tonight we're going to be talking about inclusionary zoning, which is a pretty exciting policy that was first introduced in Lawrenceville. Thank you to our colleagues in Lawrenceville. I think some of them might be on the call tonight. They kind of led the original charge for this policy, and now we're hoping to have it expanded to Bloomfield and Polish Hill. Joining us tonight is Phil Wu, our neighborhood planner from City Planning. I think I saw Chris Corbett, maybe also from City Planning, or maybe here in an unofficial capacity. And then we also have our Councilwoman, Deb Gross, on the line, and I believe James from Councilwoman Gross's office is also here. So to start off with, I'm going to let Phil take over, and he'll kind of, I think, give an overview of what inclusionary zoning is. And then I think we'll hear from Councilwoman Gross kind of about, the policy in Lawrenceville, the successes we've seen, and, what's next for inclusionary zoning and how to advocate for it. And I think we will try to hold questions until after the presentations, because I think a lot of the questions will be answered by City Planning and Councilwoman Gross.
Thanks, Sam. Can I share my screen?
Yes.
All right. Let's see. Oh, it says host disabled participant screen sharing.
I think you should be a co-host now, so you should be good to go.
Okay. Can everyone see my screen here? Okay. So yeah, thank you, Sam. So as far as what I'm going to cover in the next 15 minutes or so, this is just kind of a brief overview. So we'll quickly look at the inclusionary zoning overlay district that was adopted in Lawrenceville and how that came to be. Get into what inclusionary housing is and how it's practiced here in Pittsburgh. Define what's considered affordable in terms of the legislation that's been put forth. Get into the differences between incentivized and mandatory inclusionary zoning. And then briefly touch on what overlay districts are from a zoning standpoint. Look at what the income limits are as part of this legislation. And finally go over the requirements for inclusionary housing units as part of a new development. So just to recap, the inclusionary housing overlay district that was first implemented in Lawrenceville. So I do have Christopher here from City Planning, who was instrumental and getting that adopted and then extended, and then the permanent overlay implemented. And we also have Councilperson Gross here. So Christopher and Councilperson, feel free to chime in if you have anything to add. So again, this the inclusionary zoning overlay district in Lawrenceville first arose out of a recommendation from the Affordable Housing Task Force back in 2016. The Affordable Housing Task Force was created by Councilman Lavelle in 2015 and then signed into legislation by Mayor Peduto. The overlay district itself was introduced by Councilperson Gross in early 2019 for the Lawrenceville neighborhood, and it was passed unanimously by City Council in July 2019. The planning overlay was an 18-month interim overlay, and earlier this year, as it was set to expire, it was granted a 6-month extension by council, and then became a permanent overlay district in June of this year, again by a unanimous City Council vote. So the legislation that we're looking at for Bloomfield was likewise introduced by Councilperson Gross back in July for the Bloomfield and Polish Hill neighborhoods. And it's set to be voted on by the Planning Commission on November 23rd. And we're actually getting out the mailers this week. Sam, I remember you were asking about that. So if you live in Bloomfield or Polish Hill or within 150 miles of those neighborhoods, check your mailboxes toward the end of this week for a nice little postcard. After a vote by Planning Commission, the legislation will be voted on by City Council probably early next year. And just like the Lawrenceville interim overlay, this new overlay would be an 18-month interim overlay. And the pending legislation is the same as what was adopted in Lawrenceville, which means that any new construction or any significant renovation or any conversion of over 20 units is affected by this legislation and is enforced by deed restriction. So this is just a map of the two neighborhoods. So just to kind of step back and discuss the key points of inclusionary housing. Inclusionary housing or inclusionary zoning, it ties production of affordable housing, and we'll get into what that means in a bit. But it ties the production of affordable housing to the production of market rate housing. So affordable housing becomes a package deal with market priced housing. The goal of inclusionary housing is to ensure that a neighborhood can continue to offer housing units at a variety of price points and not just what the market is commanding. As far as the types of inclusionary housing policy that we have in the zoning code right now, we have both incentivized inclusionary housing and mandatory inclusionary housing, and we'll get into both of those in a bit. So what is defined as affordable in terms of the pending legislation? For renters, it's defined as no more than 30% of monthly income on housing costs, which includes a utility allowance that's defined by the Housing Authority of Pittsburgh, or calculated by the developer using the methodology of the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency. For owners, affordable is defined as no more than 28% of monthly income to be spent towards a 30-year fixed mortgage, assuming a 5% down payment, plus any taxes, fees, and insurance costs. So for renters, the rent price is calculated based on 30% of the income of someone earning 50% of the area median income for the Pittsburgh metro area. And this is a figure that's updated every year. For owners, the affordable pricing is calculated based on 28% of the income of someone earning 70% of area median income. So just to jump back into what incentivized inclusionary housing is, this is actually not what's in the legislation for Bloomfield and Polish Hill, but it's just useful to know as in terms of context. So incentivized inclusionary housing means that a developer can choose to price some units to affordable standards in exchange for some kind of benefit. So it's often increased height or density or closer proximity to a waterway. And this type of incentive is currently found in the riverfront zoning overlay, the RIV district, and the Uptown Eco Innovation District. And it's probably something that we're going to see more in the future with planned developments. So anything you may find in like a SP district, for instance, this is something that you see a lot of demands for. So SP districts include like the Southside Works, Bakery Square, the Lower Hill, and a few others. I think there are 9 total throughout the city. Mandatory inclusionary housing, which is what we're looking at with this proposed overlay in Bloomfield and Polish Hill, applies across both neighborhoods to any new construction, significant rehab or conversion or reuse projects of 20 or more units for sale or for rent. And there's no incentive here. So the developer is actually required to build 10% of the units in the development under the affordable guidelines. And since the Lawrenceville inclusionary zoning overlay was first piloted, the legislation has affected 40 properties there, 35 of which are rental properties and 5 of which are for sale properties. And just to briefly recap what an overlay district is from a zoning standpoint, it does not change the area's existing zoning. Instead, it goes on top of the existing zoning classification. And it basically adds another layer of zoning requirements. So in this case, the requirement with the overlay is for mandatory inclusionary housing. Oops. So we kind of briefly touched on this earlier, but in terms of the income levels specified in the legislation, for renters, it applies to those making up to 50% AMI. So that does depend on family size, and we'll get into that in a bit. But one important thing to note is that if a renter starts out at 50% of AMI, and then at some points they're making 80% of AMI, they're going to be required to move out of the rental units at the end of their lease. And as far as potential homeowners, the household has to continue living in the home as long as they meet what's called the eligible household requirement. So that's 80% AMI. So AMI, it means that half of the households in the region earn less than that amount and half earn more. And it's calculated every year by Department of Housing and Urban Development for the entire Pittsburgh metro area. So this is just a table. I think it might be getting close to being outdated at this point, but it shows the incomes and rents that meet the 50% AMI threshold for renters and the 80% AMI threshold for potential homeowners. So for a single person renting, what's defined as affordable, it would be considered $700 a month. For a household of 4, that would be about $1,000 a month. For homeowners, $11.20 a month in mortgage costs plus any other fees or taxes for a household of one is what's considered affordable, and $1,600 a month for a household of four. As far as requirements for affordable units, the legislation, again, as we mentioned earlier, requires 10% of the units in any developments of 20 or more new converted or substantially rehabbed units to meet the affordable guidelines. And the units must be scattered throughout the development, so you can't have just like a segregated area, of affordable units. And the units will need to be of the same size, have the same quality, same finishes, and the residents have to have the access to the same amenities as those who are paying the market rates. There's kind of a provision as well that allows for off-site inclusionary units if on-site inclusionary units, for whatever reason, are not deemed feasible. And these off-site units have to be no more than a quarter mile away, and they have to be approved as a special exception by zoning board. And that 10% affordable unit counts in that instance gets bumped up to 12%. And then lastly, the units are required to remain affordable for a minimum of 35 years. And if the units are sold during that time, the 35-year clock automatically restarts. So we have a webpage up on our Engage PGH platform, engage.pittsburghpa.gov/izodx, where it's just kind of the website where people can submit comments or just read more about inclusionary zoning. I've also linked here the legislation text, and I know that's too long of a URL to copy, so I'll send around this presentation to Sam, and he can distribute it to everyone on this meeting. And yeah, if you have any questions between now and the hearing, feel free to contact me. My email address is philip.wu@pittsburghpa.gov. And yeah, thank you. Open to any questions. Again, we have Christopher here who has gone through this before, and he can also chime in if might not be able to answer anything, or if he has any experience he wants to share from the same legislation in Lawrenceville. So thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Before we take questions, I think I'm going to let Councilwoman Gross talk a little bit about inclusionary zoning. She's kind of been the champion of this legislatively, and has been involved in a lot of conversations in Lawrenceville and obviously now in Bloomfield and Polish Hill. So I'm hoping she can tell us a little bit more.
Hi, everybody. Good to see you all. Again, I'm Deb Gross. I'm the City Councilwoman for District 7, which includes Lawrenceville and Polish Hill and Bloomfield, and a bunch of other neighborhoods as well: Friendship, Morningside, Stanton Heights, Highland Park, where I live, and Strip District. Thank you all, and I really am excited to be here for this conversation about the idea of moving this overlay district to both Bloomfield and to Polish Hill. And thanks, Phil, for the very helpful PowerPoint presentations. What is an overlay? That's an extra layer of zoning. It's always important to remember the base layer stays the same. So it's adds, it doesn't take away anything, but it adds certain requirements. That's important to understand. But I also wanted to kind of give a little background about how our conversations went over the years that kind of arrived with Lawrenceville doing the inclusionary zoning, piloting it for the city, and kind of where that came from, what were my experience in talking to people in Lawrenceville and how we move that forward, so that I think that might be helpful for Bloomfield, right? And the residents to kind of think about, like, are they, what kind of situation are they in, and how those conversations move forward. Actually looked at my email right before the meeting started, because I had like sat down at 6 o'clock thinking it was starting at 6. And so I was looking back, how far back did this conversation go? And I found an email from September of 2015 that was probably motivated by about 13 acres of Lawrenceville having just sold to an out-of-town developer, which is, we all know now, is Millhouse. And it was Lawrenceville leaders and residents wanting to come in the same day, kind of emailing in the morning and saying we had to talk to the councilwoman as soon as possible. Like, we want to come in, we want to come downtown today. And that's exactly what happened. We kind of got an email in the morning, and by 3:30 we were meeting, and they were talking about the kinds of the amount of stress and pressure that neighbors felt about affordability in housing. So aside from all the other very important issues that we live through on a daily basis, like trying to make parking better for everybody, trying to support small businesses, trying to, preserve neighborliness in the neighborhood, that for them, even in 2015, people were most upset. They felt like it was an emergency to talk about, what do we do about keeping affordability in the neighborhood? We're losing our neighbors who rent. We're losing our neighbors even who own, and because of the real estate pressure. And we had kind of at that same time, by that point in 2015, started a conversation at council with the Affordable Housing Task Force was just launching. It was a pretty big task force. There were some of nearly 100 people involved in that. And so already there were ideas coming from other cities. And even though there are lots of things that we can do for affordable housing, including, building entirely affordable buildings like we have at Penn and Matilda on Penn Avenue, which is a beautiful project, like the project that's being built at the Doughboy currently. One of the other things we can do is try to require some affordable units out of these really big developers who seem to be kind of coming to Pittsburgh and starting this conversation. And so that idea for just a Lawrenceville pilot started pretty much that day. And we can see a string of emails going back and forth saying, what do we do to create just an overlay for Lawrenceville? And as the months and years went by, there were many, many community meetings in Lawrenceville where the residents asked developers to do affordable housing, and the developers just said no. They didn't have to, and so they just didn't. 100-person meetings with, hour after hour of testimony and questions from residents, and the developers just said no. We don't have to do it. It's not what we do. We're just going to do for profit. And most of us now are familiar with what's happened. So you get down to Butler Street at 40th and Butler, and you see that kind of wall of development at that site that those developers bought. And you see like the storefronts on Butler, and there's the 250 units. There's not a single affordable unit in that section of that site. But years later, we were able to get the inclusionary zoning legislation in place. And if you look now, it's nearly completed behind that section. There's another huge 350 unit structure, and that one has 35 affordable units. So it will be coming online at deeply discounted rates. So it's one of the tools in the toolbox. It does not do everything. The reason it was such a priority for Lawrenceville is they felt that their big sites were under really imminent development pressure. And they knew those developers wanted to build big multi-unit buildings, and even some smaller developments, kind of like on the main street on Butler Street. You see some buildings. The one that has 5 units for sale is maybe a 25-unit building. They knew that these sites would be moving. They knew that there was enough incentive for developers to come in and buy and develop. And they wanted to make sure that they kept, it was really important for them to make sure that their neighborhood didn't just go to all luxury housing. And it was a really articulated priority for the neighbors, that while there may be some units, rental units and homes that are at a very high price point, and now 6 years later, we see there are very, very, very many units, rental units and houses at a very expensive scale. They wanted to make sure that there was a mix of ranges of affordability in the neighborhood, because it felt like it was under pressure that if we let it up to the market alone, it would only be expensive housing with people who could afford expensive housing left in the neighborhood. And this is one of the ways that we can make sure that there's a blend in whatever developers do to just make it law, basically. So, if we put it in zoning, it's law and they have to do it. And so they did it. And I think Philip mentioned that even though by the time we got it into place, we were just the year before COVID started. And across the nation, construction, a lot of places, construction stopped. Projects got put on hold. But the market was so strong in Lawrenceville that those projects didn't get put on hold even for a day. They just moved forward, even with the new requirements. We asked the developers point blank to their faces, is this going to be trouble for you to finance your project, having to include these affordable units? And they just said no. And so they just moved straight forward without a hiccup. And those units are coming online now. So I just wanted to kind of give you that background that while it won't do everything for you, becoming part of what is now this like overlay that other neighborhoods can join into will allow you this much, that as luxury units are added, there will also be affordable units added. And I know that I've sat through a lot of meetings that have been organized by Bloomfield Development Corporation over the years, and I've personally heard that testimony going back certainly on some of the major sites. I've heard it out of Bloomfield residents directly. So this is one of the tools that can get you to that place, so that you're making sure that you won't only have luxury development, that you'll have affordable units added wherever there is luxury development. So I don't know if there was anything else you wanted me to touch on, but that was the kind of just the way we moved through that conversation in Lawrenceville. And I really see a lot of the same sentiments coming out of the community meetings that I attend in Bloomfield and in Polish Hill now. So I think this is really good timing.
Yeah, thank you for giving all of that background. And I wanted to take a second to plug our meeting next Monday about one of those large sites in Bloomfield. Many of you will be very familiar with the SureSave site. And so next Monday, I'll drop the information in the chat. We'll be having a development activities meeting about a proposed project for that site. And Christina Howell, our executive director, is just gonna really quick talk about some of the background about, all of the places we've heard about the need and desire for more affordability in Bloomfield.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Deb. So I just wanted to quickly go over some of BDC's work in the past and kind of how we got to this point. So in 2017, we were approached by, I personally, as part of BDC, was approached by a gentleman who was a vice president of Millhouse. Millhouse Development is a large-scale developer that does have shareholders that they answer to, meaning that they do try to, generally speaking, they don't want affordable housing in their developments because it lowers the profit for their shareholders. Not significantly, it's important to note, but it does lower the profit. The other reason they don't like to add affordable housing is, and to quote this vice president, it is not on brand for their company. So at the development activities meeting that we held in early 2018, we had approximately 380 people sign in, and then we stopped counting. The fire marshal later scolded us. There were about, we guess, about 450 people in the West Penn Hospital Nursing School auditorium. We turned away at least another 100, probably more, and had around 3,000 views on the meeting recording on Facebook within 2 weeks after the meeting. So this was a big deal. It was nearly unanimous at that meeting that the main concern with that was that these units would be market rate, meaning that you have to make a pretty good income to afford them, and even more expensive than market rate. There would be no units that would be accessible to a whole lot of people in Bloomfield. You know, I think many of our families and households on this call might not be able to have afforded those units even 3 years ago. BDC has prioritized new affordable housing in these large developments. One of the main reasons is because we have a very high population of residents over 60. It's about 20%. And most of our housing stock is 3-story houses. So I'm not sure about everyone here, but as a resident of Bloomfield, I have a few neighbors who have extreme difficulty going up and down the stairs to get to their laundry in the basement or get to their bedroom and their bathroom on the second floor. And these affordable units are accessible to our older residents who are on a fixed income. And you know, we feel that's very important, that there be options. The other thing about new construction being affordable is not only is it a lower cost and accessible to our residents who, you know, aren't making 60, 75,000 or more a year, but it's also for folks who are disabled and our older residents. You get a building with an elevator and often some amenities, excuse me, that are needed by those folks. So the result of that meeting was that Millhouse pulled out of the project. The SureSafe site went back on the market, and Echo Realty, the development arm of Giant Eagle, has now purchased the property. And next Monday evening, the community will be reviewing the preliminary plans, and they are very preliminary. There will be more meetings as the plans are fleshed out more. But to review those plans by Echo Realty, as well as give feedback directly to the developer, and then BDC takes that feedback and turns it into our advocacy points with the developer, where we push them to respond to the community's needs and wants. In late 2018, we received a small grant and held a planning exercise workshop over, I think, 3 different meetings or workshops, where folks got to envision what they would want at the SureSafe site. All of the people attending were split up into groups, and all of those folks identified affordable housing, a little bit of public space, and a grocery store as very important. And as you'll see next week, the developer has included all 3 of those things to some degree. So I just wanted to give that quick background. You know, I'm happy to take questions about that too in the question and answer period. So thanks.
Okay, oh, I'm gonna admit someone. Bruce is emphasizing next Monday's meeting in the chat. Yeah, so I think at this point, we will open it up to questions from everybody. I don't believe we have anybody that's called in by phone, but if you did, you can raise your hand using *6, and then you can unmute yourself using *9. Otherwise, I will take questions via a raised hand. There should be under reaction, or yes, under reactions at the bottom of your screen, you can click raise hand and that will raise your hand, or you can also drop questions in the chat and we will try to get to them as they come in.
Don't be shy. If you have a question, as my kids' teachers say, then probably a lot of other people have it.
All right. Bruce, it looks like you had your hand raised first, so you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, neighbors. Hi, everyone. Thank you to Phil for that, like, inclusionary zoning 101 crash course, like inclusionary zoning for dummies. Like, that was a lot. And I guess I want to follow up with you, Phil, and even Christopher Corbett. For some of us who maybe just need to know, like, an example, can you speak to maybe the example of the development that Deb spoke to, of the second phase of the Arsenal development that's right off of the 40th Street Bridge as you're going over the river? Can you talk about, just like numbers wise, like in that second phase of development, like how many units? I know there's a number like 35, but for example, for however many of those units of 35 that is affordable, like what are those units, what are they paying, right? So I think just to give folks here kind of an idea of exactly like what does it mean for something that's like literally down the hill from us, how much are those units going for, how long will they be affordable, just so we all kind of have a real example and can picture it in our mind.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Bruce. So Arsenal 201 is coming out in 2 phases, starting the top of next year in January. We have 15 units coming on, 18 units coming on, and it ranged from a studio efficiency into a 2-bedroom. The code kind of regulates how many people can be in each unit. So in a studio, of course, there's one tenant. And if we're looking at numbers, that tenant would roughly make an average income about $29,700, and their rent is $742. And so I want to echo the point that Christina actually said when this is a new unit. So, you know, every tenant is experiencing this unit for the first time. Newer amenities, nice finishes, and most important, it's very transit oriented. So it's in Lawrenceville, it's in Bloomfield, wherever this new development is, those inclusive units, those tenants are taking advantage of all of those amenities. So okay, Bruce, you have a question. Hold on just a second, I'll get to it. So yeah, the average income is about $29,700, and the rent will be $742. So that's at 50% AMI. It is case by case. And Bruce, you said they're still eligible for that 1-bedroom. You're correct, yes. So does that answer your question, Bruce, or do you want to hear about 1-bedrooms too?
No, that's great. I guess maybe since you said the 2 bedrooms, that would be great for like a family. And I know that we're really advocating for more family units, right? So what would be something like a 2-bedroom in that example in Lawrenceville?
Yeah, so let me just tell you about the other 2 options too. So at Millhouse or Arsenal 201, they have a 1-bedroom. It will possibly be priced around $795. And then a 2-bedroom will be priced around $955. So that's right under $1,000. And we're looking at possibly up to three tenants at that point in those units. So that's probably, you know, a parent and 2 children. It can be a couple and a child, whichever that is, and their income will not exceed the allotted amount that we do have, and I can get that to you too.
Awesome. I'm gonna go to David Weber next, who has a hand raised.
Yes, hello everyone. I do have a question, but I just want to say before I ask my question that I strongly support having some inclusionary zoning. I mean, I think we should continue to look at the mechanisms of doing that, but I think it's very important and really should be citywide. You know, really when the private developers come in, you just want to change the equation. They know they're going to have taxes a certain amount. They know they're going to have various expenses. This is just one of those things. It doesn't matter where they're building. We should do that so we can get ahead of this a little more rather than scrambling right as developments are about to happen and trying to put them in. I think, you know, it would be useful over in the Shady Side area right now, where they're talking about at the Giant Eagle site there as well at Shakespeare Street. So I don't think this proposal extends there. My question is about who's responsible for monitoring the income of the tenant, that they remain eligible, and who monitors the ongoing, you know, compliance with the affordability over 35 or plus years are sort of my 2 questions. Thank you.
Great question, David. So I can answer that. The way that the program is set up now, our property managers will do the initial income verification, and then the city will do an audit of all of those applicants and tenants to make sure that the property management is in compliance with our code. And then we'll do recertification as well each and every year. Earlier, I know that in the code, it does state that a tenant can enter, or applicant could enter in a 50% AMI. If they were to make their income was to go to 80%, they will have to make a decision to either leave that unit at the end of the lease and or renew at market rate. So I do want to share that. And that's one way to make sure that everyone's the most impacted, those inclusive units are going to the most impacted residents.
Right. If I could just ask Philip, do you know who at the city is handling that responsibility at this point? Is that in the URA or at city planning, or just curiously? Thanks.
Well, just based on what the legislation says, it, the applicant, the developer has to provide evidence of an enforceable commitment. And as far as how that's enforced, I'll have to defer to either Christopher or Councilwoman Gross on that.
Sure. The way that is going to be enforced as of now, the audit will be done from our housing HACP with a partnership with the URA too. So right now it is.
Sorry. Yeah, just in case people don't understand the acronyms, right? So
sure.
Since that's
you can fill me in later. That's fine.
Yeah, since that's something the Housing Authority does on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
Those skill sets are there. I haven't seen there be a cooperative agreement coming through, but I'm sure that's probably how it will be housed, either amending a cooperative agreement that we have with them now, which is just when you have a contract between two government bodies, which that is. But we got to figure that out real quick because those units are coming online in 2022, right, Christopher?
That's right, in January. And so you'll be seeing something.
Harassing your boss about that, so I'm sure
I'll make sure that you'll see that on your desk soon. Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna go to Lou DePlantier next.
Yeah, that's good enough. Hi everyone, I'm Lou. Thanks for the information. As somebody who doesn't really want any luxury housing in Bloomfield and who also feels like these affordable housing prices are still too high to be called totally affordable, I want to know about the other tools in the toolbox because I'm not very, familiar what else we have going on right now. If there are other things that we can support in general, yeah.
Christopher, I'll start off and you can finish or jump in. You may not know that there is another building which will be affordable at the 30% AMI level. So everyone considers that pretty deeply affordable. That's just under construction. I think we have the ribbon cutting coming up very soon. So it's near completion maybe at the Doughboy. And that'll be very similar. It's done also by Action Housing, who did the development at Penn and Matilda, the one that has a symbol in the bottom. That's a building that's entirely affordable. We don't do enough of those buildings. We would all like to see, I would like to see, and I'm sure you would like to see more of those kinds of buildings. The part that really subsidizes, expensive new construction, because new construction is going to be expensive no matter what, is that the developers get a tax credit from the state. It's called a low-income housing tax credit. It's often referred to as LIHTC. And that allows them to build a new building and be able to not get as much rent out of it. And it kind of just, pays for that gap between what the market would pay and what, taking the cheaper rents. If the state would expand that program and give the city more of those tax credit projects, you have to apply once a year, only once a year. And then they kind of give you just like a couple, some years we get none. This year, I think coming up, we are getting 2. It would really help us do that, or other big pots of money that would help us kind of subsidize affordable housing. It's also something that the Housing Authority of Pittsburgh could probably do more robustly, maybe in combination with the County Housing Authority. That's where they get, specific federal, not state dollars, but federal dollars in order to do affordable housing. And certainly I'm open, and I think a lot of it's probably long overdue for other kind of housing alternatives, cooperative housing, mutual housing, the kinds of stuff that we used to know how to do 100 years ago, and we've kind of forgotten how to do. So yeah, we're all trying to think out of the box because these rents are just too damn high. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Christopher. Take it away.
Yeah, just to add on to that. So there's other tools that we are exploring now that you'll possibly see starting next year. One that has kind of took place in Garfield. I see Nina is on here too. So in Garfield, there was accessory dwelling units. So ADUs is one that, from a zoning perspective, we're taking a look at how to build a smaller unit on your property. You can use that for rental income. That's great. It's more affordable. Someone, Lou, you may be interested in renting there on site. That's one way that we can do that as well, provide more affordable housing. I will also like to do a shameless plug to let everyone know that the city planning, we're working to update the housing needs assessment. That's kind of where all of this came from, inclusionary zoning back in 2016. So we're now taking a look at 2021 to 2040 to kind of come up with a few recommendations that we can incorporate and build into our zoning code to make new construction and newly renovated properties more affordable and reach a deeper need here. So we'll find out how many units we're lacking. When it comes to affordable units in 2016, there was 20,000. And so that was the number that is still kind of repeated throughout. And so we'll take a look and see how many of those units have we created that are now affordable through inclusionary zoning and other mechanisms that we've used. And then come up with a creative way to track those units going forward so we can be on track and have an attainable goal.
I will add in that some of the tools that Bloomfield Development Corporation uses as well is we've identified are in the process of finding commercial buildings / warehouses that are in disuse, not sorry, not used or closed up, and that the owners are potentially going to sell in a few years. We do have a number of kind of larger industrial, not larger, but medium-sized industrial buildings that like the Empire on Liberty, which has Bloomfield's first $1 million unit in it on Liberty Avenue, could be bought by a for-profit developer before we know what's happening. So BDC is trying to take a more proactive approach and reaching out to these building owners, because there are affordable housing developers like Action Housing. They did the one on Penn and Matilda. Trek Development, who have done a lot of work in Pittsburgh. And if we can find those buildings and then have the owner meet the potential nonprofit housing developer, then we can often, community groups and community development corporations like us can often achieve some new affordable housing. The other thing we're doing is that we do have a property on Lorigan, at the corner of Lorigan and Pearl. Wait a minute. We've applied for conservatorship through the court. We're looking at long abandoned buildings, and through some lawyers reaching out to any heir, any person that might be related to the people that own it. The lawyers that we're working with have been exhaustive in their approach in trying to find these potential relatives, third, fourth generation, from the folks who owned it. And this is our first one that we're trying. And it came to our attention because actually a predatory company who takes these houses, buys them at, and that are pretty decrepit, puts some money into them and then turns them around and sells them for an enormous profit at a very expensive rate. So we intervened in court to try to become the conservator. And if we are awarded that, then we've brought in City of Bridges as the remediator. City of Bridges is a land trust, which means that they separate. The land trust stays with the land stays with City of Bridges, and only the house is sold. And it's kind of a complex thing that I have just fairly recently wrapped my head around completely. But it stays affordable for 99 years. And has, so the owner can make some profit, but the amount of profit is capped. So the house could potentially be sold from somewhere to 120 to 160,000 for a newly renovated home in Bloomfield. So there's a few other things we're starting to dip into, but those are the two that we're working heavily on right now. We're hoping to get into some repair of low-income residents who are homeowners of their homes, hopefully getting some grants to do that so that they can build some equity. So I think that's where we are right now. Unfortunately, we still need about 20,000 affordable units in Pittsburgh, and all of these things are a tiny, tiny drop in the bucket. And I don't know about all y'all, but I know a lot of people have been priced out of Bloomfield the last 6-7 years, and it's really sad. So anyway, that's all I wanted to say about that. Just kind of the things we're working on.
To follow up also, the City of Bridges Land Trust works on a model that can work for affordable housing, but you probably are also familiar with Land Trust for environmental conservancies, land conservancies. That's the kind of the same model, but with a different mission, but using really the same tools. And I saw a question in the Slack Are ADUs, again, accessory dwelling units, like having another dwelling someone could actually live in, but on your property, are they permitted citywide? And they are not, which is why city planning's doing the work on it. And it's so to lower those barriers that are in your way, so that people can add the alley houses, which are so traditional, is a great example, right? In a lot of places in Bloomfield, we have houses in the alley, but you wouldn't be allowed to build that now. And so it's kind of going back to our original forms where you can cram twice as much housing in the same amount of space. It's kind of trying to undo the kind of suburbanization of our housing code that happened somewhere along the way. Or, you know, a garage apartment or even an additional apartment in your house that could still be considered an accessory dwelling unit. So it's kind of, it's upzoning in a way, which is something like a new word that people talk about. So I think those are all really positive, but yes, if only we had started 5 years ago on a lot of these things. We have more affordability in Bloomfield for sure.
Okay.
I applaud BDC's efforts on conservatorship too. Thank you for being pioneers there. I know there's a few community organizations trying to do that citywide, and it's one of these tools in state code that we just haven't done enough of here. So thank you for that work.
Okay, before we go to another question, I just wanted to highlight there was a question in the chat about the AMI numbers compared to what the median income is in Bloomfield. And Phil Wu helpfully told us that Bloomfield's median income is somewhere around $52,000 a year compared to $60,000 for the Pittsburgh region.
Don't quote me on that. That was a very quick search. It's probably not completely accurate, but I can definitely look that information up to get a better answer.
Yeah, but just kind of recognizing that the area median income is not set at a neighborhood level. I think that's helpful knowledge for people to have when we're thinking about affordable housing, both in our neighborhood and citywide. And so for our next question, I'm going to go to Linda Vaca. You've had your hand raised for a while, so you can go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me? I haven't done very many Zoom calls, but I have a question for, I guess, Christine. She mentioned about the need for seniors, living in 3-story homes and whatever. Do Bloomfield residents or Polish Hill residents, do they have some priority for these affordable units? Do they get first place in line, or how are those units divvied out?
So we're not sure right now. I think it depends on what's legal and what's not. You know, there's various housing legalities that I haven't researched yet, but we will be doing that. The Action Housing Development on Penn and Matilda, that prioritizes veterans, low-income veterans.
Right.
And so we're not sure if we'll be able to do that. But I can say if ECHO isn't able to do that, then I guarantee that Sam and I and our board are going to be out door knocking with the applications the second they're released for folks that we come across who need that kind of housing, those older residents.
What's happened in Lawrenceville? If we have 35 units going to go to affordable housing, how do they, I mean, maybe Deb can answer this question.
Yeah.
How do they pick who gets the units? I mean,
Right, so it hasn't started yet, Linda. So I do believe, I'm not sure if they've started the official waiting list
Okay.
for those units. Those
and it would be
coming
citywide,
online in 2022.
but it would be citywide, not, I mean, I don't want people to get the idea that these 30 units they're going to put down in Shore Save for affordable housing are going to go to Bloomfield people first. So people need to know that if there's no plan or no idea how that's going to be done, can't promote it as an answer for our seniors in Bloomfield.
Yeah,
That's a good point.
sorry, I didn't mean to promote it as something, as an answer, but I can say that that's one of our priorities, and that's one of the reasons that we are so staunchly chasing any opportunity. But yeah, the ones in Lawrenceville have been open to residents citywide. So
Right.
again, I'm not sure how that's going to work, but we're going to find out for sure.
Okay.
Okay.
I can possibly
Linda?
add
Yeah,
some
and also
clarity to
Christopher
it.
and Linda, we can, after this meeting, we can maybe pull up some of the data for a very similar one that was older, which is at Morningside Crossings, which was for seniors. It was
Yes.
the exact same concern. So let me try to get you those numbers, because I do.
And then
know
my concern
people
is this,
who moved into it, and so it did. I don't feel like there is so much pressure citywide. Seniors kind of want to stay close to home, so that
Right.
ends up kind of having different markets for the senior housing. But certainly
right,
it would be helpful if we had more. But I'm
this just
happy to
leaves the
follow
one
up
other
on that.
question then. So the 80-year-old woman that lives on Cedarville Street and can't take the steps anymore, sells her house on Cedarville Street at like 250,000 or 300,000, because that's the going price. Does that money that she makes on that house get factored into her affordable rent, even though she only gets $20,000 a year on Social Security?
It's based on income, Linda. So that's another excellent question. Let's write that one down and follow up on that one too, because
Thank
that's
you.
not income. It's
No.
just one-time capital gain. It's not
Yeah.
like your annual income.
Mm,
So
right.
I love that question. That's a really good question.
Yeah,
Okay.
for some reason I can't, I'm not sure I heard this, but yeah, my understand is that the capital gains of a house sale, especially if you're, I think it's above a certain age, but I might be thinking of West Virginia because my mom just did the,
Yeah, and it would only be that
Um,
year. A capital
but-
gain is only for that tax year.
okay, yeah.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Okay, just questions that came up in my mind.
Thanks, Linda.
Thank you.
I also, before we go to the next question, I'm going to read Dave Bringen, who is joining us from Lawrenceville, where they've had some experience with this already. He said, speaking for Lawrenceville, we work with the tenants who are at risk of displacement or have been displaced all the time and have developed a long list of residents waiting for inclusionary units to come online. So that, I guess, kind of gives a little bit of insight into some of the work that the community can do to, help prepare for when these units do come online. So next, I'm going to go to Jennifer Kiley. Jennifer, it's showing me that you're unmuted, but I can't hear you, so I'm not sure if you're asking your question.
Hear me now.
Oh, I just heard you come through.
There you go. So I'm going to jump back a little. Deb Gross, Councilwoman Gross had some comments regarding zoning. I'm trying to remember, there was a point a number of years ago in Lawrenceville when flippers were coming in that I want to say there was a change in zoning so that you couldn't take a single family home and divide it. So then to create some of this more affordable housing, as had been done years past by creating a mother-in-law apartment, similar to an accessory dwelling. And certainly we see a lot of that in the bigger places in Bloomfield and Friendship, where they've been divided into apartments. I just want to, is there anything in zoning that's precluding that? If you have a larger house, it could be divided and made into affordable housing. Is there currently anything in zoning that would preclude that? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. I don't remember that there was anything particular to Lawrenceville that was different than other parts of the city, but certainly there's a difference in parts of Lawrenceville and parts of Bloomfield of what is R1 versus R3 or 4. And I know that Philip and Christopher know this a lot better than I do. So residential for one is really more single family and less easy. It would be like a variance to get it chopped up into more units, whereas an R4 is residential, but is more meant for being multi-unit. So tell me what I said that was wrong there, Philip. And is the ADU thing different than moving, like why don't we just rezone from R1 to R4? Do we need the ADUs differently from that? This is very wonky zoning code for everybody here. So maybe we only want to spend a little bit of time on it.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I just want to finish. So I see Dave Brennigan is on the call. He's the executive director of Lawrenceville United. So I'm sorry, he may be able to answer that. It may have been, I'm remembering that somebody was trying to promote that change in zoning. So I may be misremembering. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm not sure what you're referring to, Jen, but there have, yeah, I can't think of any recent zoning changes related to density of single family housing.
Yeah, the only thing that comes to mind is the accessory dwelling units legislation that was introduced back in 2018 and has since expired and hasn't been renewed.
Awesome, thank you. I'm going to next go to, there was a question in the chat about seniors being prioritized for some of these affordable units. And I guess just to kind of clarify, I think inclusionary zoning is sort of this overarching policy that helps to create new affordable units. And so I think oftentimes when we see units being set aside for specific populations, like the Penn Matilda apartments that Christina mentioned being set aside for veterans, that's sort of a specific development, whereas a policy like inclusionary zoning that's meant to create more affordability across the board wouldn't necessarily maybe be the best place to set aside those units. And if anybody else wants to say anything about that.
Yeah, I actually want to chime in on it too, because it actually struck me too. So there's not a list per se. What happens is the units are open up to, the inclusive units are open up to those who qualify and meet those criteria for inclusionary zoning. Through our code, we are requiring all developers to kind of market those units with community organizations. And so, for example, Lawrenceville and Dave has been a huge advocate and a great assistance in finding those residents in Lawrenceville and letting them know the day when those units are coming live and providing like an outlet for marketing of those units as well. Again, this is a city, anyone in the city can apply to those units if you meet the criteria. The great thing is that we are partnering with those neighborhood organizations to make sure that those units are being marketed when that time comes.
And before you mute yourself, well, you already did, Christopher. There's another question in the chat from Abby Ray about, the people that are in those units, if their income outgrows the AMI, and they choose to stay on for their lease at market rate, does a new unit get set aside for the inclusionary rate?
That's a great question. So we'll always have the bucket of that 10% right now. So 10% of those units, 35, they can be floated, if you will. So if I am a tenant in one and qualified at 50%, for whatever reason, my income increased, that's great. At the end of that lease, I can stay in that unit and pay market rate. But another unit will have to be set aside for as an inclusionary zoning because we have to maintain that designated 10%.
Okay, next I'm gonna go back to David Weber, who has a hand raised again.
Yeah, thanks. I just, I'm a Bloomfield resident, but in my day job, I work as a policy analyst for the Public Housing Authority Directors Association. So I wanted to speak to a couple things. One, certainly for talking about going back to what Deb said about the federal resources, the reconciliation negotiation that's going on right now is going to determine how big various pots are going to be. So if you're an advocate for housing funding from the federal government, call your congressmen and senators in the morning. But aside from that, the tax credit pot could grow. On the preference issue, if there's a subsidy involved, then it becomes harder to preference, especially geographically, if there's a federal subsidy involved. The inclusionary units that are mandated under the inclusionary zoning provision, however, don't have that kind of direct subsidy, so they're not as subject to this. So they can then work with the community organization to have a channel for neighborhood applications. You can preference for seniors in a building more easily. Veterans and other groups can be targeted in certain situations, but it gets complicated. I guess that was about. I thought I had another point, but it slipped my mind. So thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to go next to a question in the chat for Christopher. Do you know where the 10% requirement comes from and how it was determined? And I'm going to tack on a question of my own, because I know in some feasibility studies and reports for Pittsburgh specifically, there was talk of how inclusionary zoning requirements could be a little bit higher in certain markets. And I'm wondering, is that something we might expect to see down the line in Bloomfield, or maybe just in other neighborhoods that have inclusionary zoning?
Yeah, so let me try and answer the first one for the first question first. So the 10% requirement came from the Affordable Housing Task Force back in 2016. And it has been 5 years since that has taken place. And so we understand that the need for more affordability in housing is pertinent right now. And so when I spoke earlier of certain amendments that will come to the code, that is something that we will take a look at. One thing that will help determine the best fit number is the update to the housing needs assessment, and it will tell us the gap of affordable units that we need and how we can better get there. And so we're waiting for the housing needs assessment, running some other numbers to make sure that we're getting the right number. So that number can be 20, it can be 15, it can be 18. We're waiting for that percentage, and we'll have that as an amendment for next year. And Sam, I think I answered your question too, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Great.
I'd like to add in also that we had a robust debate that Mr. Brangan lived through for about a year in drafting the original language. I feel like, Christopher, it was before you were hired. We had like a year of meetings doing the original legislative language, and certainly many people thought we should go for a 20% at least of the units. And certainly there were a lot of people who recommended that we go for 30% EMI, like more deeply affordable. The way I remember it resolving for Lawrenceville was that using material from the consultants to the Affordable Housing Task Force and a kind of deep extra year of work that planning did on inclusionary zoning with a group called Grounded Solutions out of San Francisco, studying the market pressures in various neighborhoods at that time, was that, and Dave, that's just better, a better person to speak to this now than me, but it was really important for Lawrencevillians to add those units. So it was guesswork. Honestly, we were all trying to read the tea leaves and read all the information we had. They really wanted those developments to be built because they had already lost as a neighborhood hundreds and hundreds. We really don't even have an exact number of how many hundreds of affordable units had already been lost. Not in big towers coming down like in East Liberty, but in all those single family rooftops where houses that had 4 apartments in them had gotten flipped back to a very expensive flipped single family house. And so many hundreds of, almost invisibly, many hundreds of units had been lost. And so it was really important for the neighborhood, wanted to prioritize having the developments, but having affordable units in them. So that was the ratio we ended up with. But is it still relevant today? Is it still relevant to the hotter markets? Is it still appropriate for neighborhoods that have slightly different dynamics? I think those are all really good questions.
Okay. I'm gonna go back to Linda, and I'm not sure if that's a new hand raised or if that's a hand that's still raised from before.
No, I'm sorry. I probably raised twice. I'm done. Thank
right.
you, though.
Thank you. Okay. Are there any additional questions? Or if you asked a question in the chat that hasn't been addressed yet, feel free to drop it in there again. I've been trying to keep track of it, but there's a lot of activity in the chat right now. Abby Ray has a hand raised. You can go ahead.
Thank you. And thanks, BDC. Thanks, Deb, for putting this together. I think with like what Deb was just speaking to, and the question that had sort of like piqued in my mind, a question I have, and Deb, I think it's for you and probably also for Chris and Philip. As more information comes to light with regard to like how accurate or effective these numbers are in the current housing landscape in Bloomfield and Polish Hill, is it possible to alter the legislation? Like, is it possible to expand the amount that is earmarked as inclusionary? Do we know once this is rolling, like if we got IZ rolling in Bloomfield and Polish Hill, would it be another multi-year process to get the newest numbers in place? Like one of the concerns I think I have with IZ, and I'm a really big supporter of IZ, but it does feel like it's always running a couple of years just behind of when we needed it. And so if we do find that like, wow, these numbers aren't reflective at all of what Bloomfield's experiencing now, like is it possible to go in and, you know, amend the legislation, and what kind of turnaround would that get? Would that apply to new developments that are taking place? Like Chris, you were saying that you're waiting on that planning is waiting on new answers and new information. If that information comes in and the SureSave site hasn't yet rolled out, for example, or is just broken ground, would we be able to apply it there? Like,
I'll start if you want, Christopher. Yeah, so zoning amendments definitely are possible. I think we even debated this a little bit in how to add Bloomfield and Polish Hill, right? So we create an iPod with different levels that wasn't joining the current overlay. Are those levels strong enough? Certainly they're stronger than having nothing. And this was the kind of nearest timeline. So it's actually to add ourselves to the overlay, to add for you as Bloomfield, to add yourself to the current overlay is a kind of straight, nice line. I always remind ourselves that zoning changes are slow for a reason. Imagine, for example, living in a neighborhood where a developer initiates a major zoning change and tries to expedite it against your wishes, which is something that happens sometimes. And that is bad. So you want to make sure there is lots of public process, there are waiting periods, so that you can find out that a thing is happening and have time to have this kind of discussion. Thank you, BDC, for organizing to make sure you understand it. And so then you know how you feel about it, either for or against it. And that takes time. And this is one of the situations where more heads together are better than just reading something by yourself. You really need the kind of combined understanding. So But that's why we can't just have zoning be the only thing to fix this problem, right? And so that brings us back again to the other tools in the toolbox, because zoning alone isn't going to change it, and it's never going to be fast enough. Yeah, unfortunately. But yeah, I'm certainly open to the conversation that there could be deeper levels of affordability or higher numbers of units in our hotter markets. And we are eagerly awaiting that housing assessment, Mr. Corbett, that we don't have yet. And it's going to be finished when?
So it will be finished by the end of this year. And so it's really important for us to understand the housing market and how it has changed and compare apple to apples from 2016 to now, and come up with a game plan for the future. And so we want the next amendments, we want those to be backed by facts. We want to make sure that we're hitting or providing ourselves with an actionable goal, and we can attain that by creating certain units. And your sentiments are my sentiments, that we do need more affordable units or inclusive units. And the reason being because we need more Pittsburghs to stay in Pittsburgh, and we need more people to come to Pittsburgh. So we are trying to grow our city. This is one tool that we can use. Just to add on to, again, the housing needs assessment will be updated. We're in the final draft now. Councilperson Gross, you'll see that soon. And then amendments, will be working with the councilperson and council in general to kind of roll that out. And a new administration is coming too. And so whoever that may be, we have to make sure that our housing policies are aligned with the future growth of Pittsburgh, and as well as that administration, some of their goals that they want to see accomplished.
So and I appreciate you both so much for that, but if the housing assessment is going to be finished by the end of this year, in what sort of time frame, or is there a time frame that if IZ is passed inside of Bloomfield, would we be able to go back to developers, for example, again, SureSave, and modify, or is there a way to do that?
We can certainly modify, and so that's where the amendments of the code will come into play. And so we can probably better answer that when we're closer to the date and we have more concrete amendments that will be made to it. There's some tweaking that we have to do to the verbiage, such as like the 80% when a renter income is over 80%. What happens at the end of that lease? That's something that we want to spell out very clearly so any and everyone can understand that part too. When it comes to increasing the percentage of inclusive units, that's something that we definitely want to have backup for, and we want to roll that out in a way that developers can understand and is better serving our residents.
Awesome, thank you, appreciate.
And Abby Ray, I just want to say that amendments does not take as long as the legislative part of it. It's a little more easier, and Councilperson Gross, you're agreeing with that. So it's a little more easier. We just have to do some more work behind the scenes in order to make those amendments.
Awesome. And well, actually, no, I'll wait. You already answered it. Thank you, Christopher. I appreciate you.
You're welcome, Abby Ray. Christina, you had a question?
Yeah, I didn't have a question. I just wanted to kind of add on, and I figured if I raised my hand, then whatever. I felt like raising my hand. So I just wanted to say that in terms of timeline, we also felt a little rushed on this. We started, so the Echo Realty guy approached BDC last year asking to see our community plan that we'd made for that site with the community, and then said, oh, we'd like to hit 20-25% affordable units, which, you know, we were all excited, although tempering our enthusiasm because we've worked with developers before. And then in May, I believe, in a conversation with the developer, he told me, well, we're looking at 5 to 10%. And so we saw an opportunity to make sure we get a minimum of 10. It's important to note that the timeline starts, so the developer, if they were to put in their application to city planning, Phil, am I right? It's their
In what context?
The developer, when they submit, what documents do they have to submit that would in that moment lock them into whatever zoning is in that area, unless they get apply for a zoning exception?
Yeah, it would be their zoning application, and then the affordability component would be a deed restriction. So that would have to be recorded, I believe, with Allegheny County.
Thanks. So when the developer submits that application, then any pending legislation, any inclusionary zoning legislation that happens even 5 minutes after that does not apply to their development, is my understanding, and anyone can correct me if I'm wrong. And
Ours is already pending.
yes, exactly. And so the legislation, as of when it went to council and they voted to send it to city planning, then that means that ours is pending, and any developer that applies with zoning to build something that's over 20 units has to have at least 10% affordability.
Technically, can I correct the technicality
Oh,
there?
yes, please. Thank you. Yep.
That council initiated the legislation. So
Thank
that
you.
your council member initiated the legislation,
Yes, he
made
did.
it pending legislation. If it had been received by council from the administration, it would not be pending legislation and would not have the force of law right now.
Perfect. Thank
So
you. So
that's weird technicality of our system.
yeah, it is. It is things I'm still internalizing. 101. So I think it's also important to note that BDC will be heavily and relentlessly advocating with the developer to raise that percentage of affordable units. We'll also be looking to the community to come to those development activity meetings like next Monday and ask those questions and ask for those units. The more the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So the more people advocating for that, the better the chance is that they will listen. Thanks. That's all I wanted to say. Plug in for the meeting next Monday again.
Okay, it's getting kind of late. So very quickly, I wanted to plug, because we haven't yet that I know of, the Planning Commission hearing, which is where this legislation goes next now that it has gone through City Council. And I wanted to check with Phil. I believe the date for that hearing has been set for November 23rd.
Yeah, that's correct. November 23rd. That's a Tuesday, I believe. Yeah. And postcards will be going out this week. We're actually also going to be putting up posters around Bloomfield and Polish Hill on Thursday. So look out for those.
And I would just add that testimony to the Planning Commission can be submitted either in person via Zoom, or so not in person, but via Zoom, or you can submit written testimony. And I dropped the information in the chat with the link to the Planning Commission page where you should be able to find the email where you can send your written testimony.
If you can't find it, you can send your testimony to Sam or I. It's our first name at bloomfieldpgh.org, and we'll send it in for you.
Yeah, it's a really easy email address. It's planningcommission@pittsburghpa.gov.
I just dropped Christina and I's contact information in the chat. I do want to take an opportunity to see if there are any more questions.
When will this be in front of planning? I'm sorry, I missed the date.
It is October 23rd.
November 23rd.
November 23rd. That's right.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm sorry.
And the planning commission hearing starts at 1 p.m., but I believe they don't get to the action portion of the agenda until usually 2:15. They usually take a 15-minute break. So,
And there will also be a briefing 2 weeks prior, but there's no public testimony associated with that.
awesome. Okay, are there any other questions? I'm gonna look in the chat quick. I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat. One question I wanted to ask, and I saved it because it's kind of a policy question outside of the scope of, the currently proposed inclusionary zoning, but I was curious, are there instances where incentivized and mandatory inclusionary zoning can happen in the same geographic area? So, setting the base level expectation of 10% and then saying if you go above and beyond, you can add an extra floor. I wasn't sure if that's something that has happened or not.
I believe that might be a possibility in Lawrenceville, since
In the RIV.
actually, does the riverfront zoning go all the way to Lawrenceville? I'm not sure. I have to look
It
at a
does,
map.
but not all of Lawrenceville.
Yeah.
So yeah, that would be interesting. I have not, to the best of my knowledge, and planning can correct me here, I believe no one has used the incentivized inclusionary zoning bonus points in the RIV to date. There's not been a single development using it. So maybe those need to be stronger. One of the things we did that isn't density bonuses, it isn't in zoning, but it's in finance, part of the code, is that we really pulled back from the freebie LERDAs, the kind of 2007 era tax abatements that was like, build anything and we won't make you pay taxes, that was in place for 10 years. We really pulled those back. So the residential LERDA, I use LERDA broadly. I'm not sure that's actually talking about, but that's tax abatement for residential construction now requires the exact same 10% affordable units at 50% AMI. So you only get it citywide, you can get it for doing that. But where it's mandated, you also get the tax abatement for building those. I don't know if Phil or Christopher, if I've said that correctly, but I do remember that being a real priority in 2019 when we were putting the mandatory in place. We didn't want to give tax incentives for residential development, across the street from our inclusionary zoning overlay that didn't require the affordable units. So we made sure you didn't get them for that. Those maybe also could be strengthened.
Okay, are there any final questions? I'm going to drop some information in the chat. First is going to be next Monday's SureSave Development Activities meeting. It's at 6:30 via Zoom. And then I'm also going to drop the information about our Planning Commission hearing again. And I will also drop the BDC contact info again, so that if anybody has anything from this meeting that they want to follow up on, they can reach out to Christina or myself, but via email or phone call. And I think with that, unless there are any outstanding questions, we might be done for the evening.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks to everyone for taking time out of your busy night on a Monday night to attend. We really appreciate it.
Yeah. And we will get the recording and some of the PowerPoint from city planning and some of the other resources that were shared up on the BDC website, and we'll send out an email in the next few days or week with all of that so that people can review them if they'd like to. Maybe if you're preparing testimony for the Planning Commission hearing.
All right.
Thank you
Thanks.
all. Enjoyed it.
Thank you for being here. Thank you, Philip and Christopher and Dave. Have a great night, everyone.
Thanks, you too.
Bye, y'all.